History is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake.
100 years ago, when James Joyce published Ulysses on February 2nd, 1922, in a small bookshop in Paris, he fundamentally altered the course of modern literature, art, and culture.
With this book, Ireland is making a sensational re-entrance into high literature.
Everybody knows that Ulysses is the greatest novel of the century.
Joyce was a revolutionary. He revolutionized literary expression in a way that nobody else has.
Celebrated throughout the world as a masterpiece of modernism, Ulysses was banned in America and Britain, where it shocked and stunned in equal measure.
The obscenity of Rabelais is innocent compared with its leprous and scabrous horrors.
Ulysses is the work of a queasy undergraduate scratching his pimples.
Joyce's unparalleled genius would inspire creators as diverse as Eileen Gray, Sergei Eisenstein, Man Ray and Bob Dylan. But at home in Ireland, Joyce was accused of treachery for having gone to war with the Irish Catholic Church and repudiating his own people.
Very few people were prepared to carry their intellectual revolt as far as Joyce did.
He's not afraid to hold up the cracked looking glass of the servant, as he says, to his nation.
Joyce was also accused of ignoring his nation's long struggle for independence from Britain, which culminated in 1922, only weeks before Ulysses was published, with the foundation of the Irish Free State.
The Irish reaction to Joyce is that he turned his back on Ireland.
Today, however, Joyce and Ulysses are being considered anew. It is thought now that Joyce's war against the Catholic Church and nationalism may have been motivated by the deepest commitment to his people and his culture. And Ulysses, which remains as fresh today as it was a century ago, has revealed itself as a prophetic text that imagines a better future not only for Ireland, but for Europe and the world. In the collections of the National Library of Ireland are 3 first edition copies of Ulysses. They are among the most precious books in the world. Ulysses has been translated into over 20 languages, including Arabic, Irish and Chinese. Yet even so, it is a book renowned for being the one that many of us start, but few of us finish.
Many readers, they're terrified as they approach Ulysses. And I've often encouraged readers to ignore, if they can, the idea that they're dealing with this masterpiece and simply take a run at it.
Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead, bearing a bowl of lather, on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed.
The story of Ulysses begins in the Martello Tower in Sandy Cove, just south of Dublin. From here, Stephen Dedalus emerges a little after 8 a.m. At the same time, on the north side of the city, the book's hero, Leopold Bloom, leaves his home to begin his epic quest through Dublin.
The elevator pitch for Ulysses is, a fella walks around Dublin over the course of one day, encounters its inhabitants.
Aware that his wife is having an affair, Bloom avoids going home. He buys kidneys in a butcher's, attends a funeral, sells some advertising, has lunch, and is aroused by Gertie McDowell on Sandymount Strand. Bloom then follows Stephen Dedalus into Dublin's red light district, Nighttown, from where Bloom steers his young drunken friend home to Eccles Street, where they talk until Bloom at last returns to his bed beside Molly.
It ends with his wife, who is, having a wank in the bed on her own.
As Bloom sleeps, Molly daydreams.
And first I put my arms around him, yes, and drew him down to me so he could feel my breasts, all perfume, yes. And his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said, yes, I will, yes.
That yes will be important to our story later on. For now though, let's explore some essentials. Never shy about his capacity to write, Joyce had always intended that Ulysses would be a masterpiece, and for inspiration, he reached for one of the greatest classics of ancient literature.
Ulysses is a retelling on one level of Homer's Odyssey. The idea of somebody taking a long journey home, a 10-year odyssey, and coming across all sorts of confrontations and difficulties and challenges along the way. Ulysses compresses that into one day in the life of one city, which is Dublin.
Joyce was fascinated by the wily Ulysses and his Mediterranean Odyssey. Among his influences was a French scholar, Victor Berard, who painstakingly followed the journey of Homer's Odyssey in 1912, writing a book and taking many photographs. Joyce was particularly taken by Berard's assertion that Odysseus was a Phoenician and therefore Semitic. And so Joyce gives his hero, Leopold Bloom, a Jewish background.
My Ulysses born anew, in Dublin as an Irish Jew.
His protagonist is Jewish, which is incredibly unusual for Irish literature at the time.
For Joyce, Bloom's Jewishness allows him ask challenging questions of us about our innate prejudices towards those who appear different. And unlike Homer's Odysseus, Bloom is no swashbuckling war hero. Generous, flawed, optimistic, Bloom is an everyman. The Ireland of 1904 is a place of little economic opportunity. The island had been ruled and suppressed by Britain for over 300 years. Consequently, the Dublin that Joyce depicts in Ulysses is impoverished to the extreme.
Very poor. Everything's about money. No one has enough money, people are always waiting for money, people can't afford to drink, they got holes in their shoes. What he's showing us is a society of extremely limited human possibilities.
He's saying, look at these ordinary lives that people are leading in often dirty houses and with bad relationships and with troubles in the family and with regularly a drunken uncle or father figure in the house.
By Brady's cottages a boy for the skins lolled, his bucket of offal linked, smoking a chewed fag butt. A smaller girl with scars of eczema on her forehead eyed him, listlessly holding her battered cask hoop. Tell him if he smokes he won't grow. Ah, let him. His life isn't such a bed of roses, waiting outside pubs to bring Da home.
That isn't necessarily the narrative that all Irish people wanted to hear at the time.
The whole society is depicted as unstable, quite nasty, worried, oppressed by church and state. It's not a nice society. It's not a happy society.
Growing up in Dublin, the young Joyce had an intimate relationship with this poverty. James Augustine Joyce was born on February 2nd, 1882, at 41 Brighton Square to John Stanislaus and Mary Jane Joyce. Through financial misjudgment and a lifestyle he could ill afford, John Joyce lost the modest fortune he had inherited. When he was sacked from his job as collector of rates, his family descended into poverty.
The history of his family is horrific. Every 6 months they're piling the stuff up on the back of a lorry to move to another place. They're flogging their furniture. The mother's 17 pregnancies. She's dead at 42. 2 of his brothers die. It's dreadful.
Young Joyce often wins scholarships, money which fleetingly alleviates the family's troubles. He finds refuge in libraries, reading all he can.
Joyce is extremely clever. I mean, ridiculously clever from early on. He has a photographic memory.
One of the great things about Joyce's life experience was that fabulous education in both Clongowes and UCD that opened him up to so much.
Having graduated with a degree in modern languages, Joyce moves to Paris, ostensibly to study medicine. When he fails to fulfill the entrance requirements, he decides to stay on to experience bohemian living and to read the treasures of the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève.
His intellectual life is already European. He read French, he read Norwegian, Danish, in order to be able to read Ibsen.
In Paris, Joyce continues to find inspiration among secularist thinkers who advocate the separation of church and state.
His hero, Giordano Bruno, who was a kind of patron saint of free thinkers, had his own statue in the Campo di Fiori. If you've ever been to Rome, it's a very powerful statue of a brother with the hood looking straight at the Vatican in a brooding fashion, because of course he had been executed by the church.
Joyce is consciously looking to contemporary Europe, not just artistically, but politically. It's clear from Joyce's early correspondence that what he is looking for is something like what we would call a social democratic, modern Irish state, free from the influence of the Catholic Church.
Ten years later, when Joyce set to work on Ulysses, the church became a prime target.
Joyce was writing this book to get even with Catholicism.
Hell is an abode of demons and lost souls, filled with fire and smoke.
The church in Ireland in those days controlled the whole life of the faithful. And if you break the rules of the church, you burn eternally in hell. What offended him was the fact that it was so all-pervasive.
My mind rejects the whole present social order and Christianity. Now I make open war upon it by what I write and say and do.
In his assault against the Catholic Church, Joyce would mount a direct challenge on the moral norms of his day.
The fact that this is the first book in which a woman menstruates. We managed to evolve as a species with menstruation from the very beginning, but nobody bothered to mention it in a novel until 1922.
He understands and wishes to elevate the physical, so he's people defecating.
He read on, seated calm above his own rising smell.
He put that into his fiction, so he altered dramatically what fiction could be.
And then a rocket sprang and bang, shot, blink, blank, and oh, and then the Roman candle burst and it was like a sigh of oh.
The body was still such a taboo subject, and someone who was writing about sexual desire and, itchy arses was seen as, completely beyond the pale. And that still feels slightly uncomfortable, that you still think, oh, okay, that's not something you read about a lot.
It was almost considered porn, especially in Ireland, actually. Some of the Irish reviewers were ferocious.
The book is an assault upon divine decency. We have only an Odyssey of Sewer. It is experimental, anti-conventional, anti-Christian, chaotic, totally unmoral.
In April 1903, Joyce returns from Paris to spend time with his ailing mother until her death in August.
He's drinking, making a bit of a show of himself. He isn't prepared to get a job if it involves conforming to the values of contemporary Ireland, of which he doesn't approve.
By the early 1900s, the first tentative steps of Ireland's revolution against British rule are underway. Cultural nationalists, including organisations like the Gaelic League and the Gaelic Athletic Association, work to revive Irish culture, which they believe had been diminished as a matter of deliberate policy by centuries of British rule. But Joyce is sceptical of the cultural nationalists, whom he will vividly embody in Ulysses as a one-eyed cyclops known as the Citizen. Bloom encounters him in Barney Kiernan's pub, which once stood here on Little Britain Street.
That's your glorious British Navy, says the citizen, that bosses the earth, the fellows that will never be slaves.
One of the most humorous episodes is the Cyclops episode. It is full of nationalist tropes.
Joyce models his one-eyed citizen on Michael Cusack, the founder of the GAA.
He is one-eyed because all he can see is Irish oppression. He's no interest in anything else.
The Sassenach tried to starve the nation at home while the land was full of crops. The British hyenas bought and sold in Rio de Janeiro.
What is the point of Irish nationalism if it is merely defined as a mirror image of England, that Ireland should become a not England? Joyce could see the philosophical emptiness of that.
In their search for cultural purity, the revivalists looked to the traditional communities of the West.
Joyce wasn't interested in going to the west of Ireland for inspiration and finding some pure Irishness, because he thought that was nonsense. He was more interested in trying to contaminate that native culture, if you like, in trying to bring in outside influences.
By the age of 22, James Joyce's rebellious nature is fully formed.
Do you know what Ireland is? Asked Stephen with cold violence. Ireland is the old sow that eats her farrow.
A huge factor in Joyce's alienation is that he looks at his peer group and he thinks they don't get it. They don't understand what is wrong about contemporary Ireland, and they're going precisely in the wrong direction.
June 16th, 1904 is enshrined in Irish cultural history as Bloomsday. It's the day on which Ulysses is set. It was also the day that Joyce first walked out with Nora Barnacle, the love of his life, in Ringsend. Nora and Joyce set out that day on a most unconventional relationship that would last until the end of his life. They will have their 2 children out of wedlock, and Joyce loved and trusted her deeply.
My dear, true, good little Nora, you are my only love. You have me completely in your power.
Within months of meeting in 1904, Joyce and Nora elope and leave Ireland behind.
His decision not to marry and run off instead with Nora Barnacle was a middle finger pointed at the church and at traditional ways of living life.
With the exception of 3 visits home, in the next 40 years, Joyce will not return.
In Portrait of the Artist, he uses a Lucifer quote from the Bible, which is non serviam, I will not serve. And that's basically Joyce, the revolutionary artist.
I will tell you what I will do and what I will not do. I will not serve that in which I no longer believe, whether it calls itself my home, my fatherland, or my church. And I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning.
After some months wandering, James Joyce and Nora Barnacle find themselves in Trieste, then a major port city of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Here, Joyce finds work teaching English in the Berlitz School. Trieste, in 1904, is a bustling, multicultural melting pot, rich in languages and ethnicities. This heady confluence of human beings from all the world over will inspire Molly Bloom's soliloquy, in which she recalls childhood memories of Gibraltar.
Girls laughing in their shawls and their tall combs, and the auctions in the morning, and the Greeks and the Jews and the Arabs and the devil knows who else from all the ends of Europe.
He began to draw artistic energy from here. Something clicked and started to work. That's my impression.
In Trieste, Joyce draws on Dublin as he writes incessantly and completes his collection of short stories, Dubliners, and his semi-autobiographical novel, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Joyce's unbroken bond with Ireland also finds expression in newspaper articles and lectures he writes in Trieste. His most important lecture, which he is invited to deliver in 1907 at the Università Popolare, is surprisingly patriotic in tone.
The Irish love to refer to their country as the island of saints and sages.
He was writing about Irish nationalism in a way that was in more alignment with his own political generation than was ever expected.
The island was a true focus of sanctity and intellect, spreading throughout the continent a culture and a vitalizing energy.
It talks about Irish monastic learning in the Middle Ages and how they brought their learning out to Europe.
In this lecture, Joyce correlates British tyranny in Ireland with the worst excesses of colonialism.
What England did in Ireland over centuries is no different from what the Belgians are doing today in the Congo Free State.
I think one's nationalism often becomes a bit accentuated when you leave a country.
Joyce and Nora's two children, Lucia and Giorgio, are born and raised in Trieste. Joyce continues to drink too much, and though the family is always short of money, he refuses to live as a poor man.
He used to spend whatever he made. They used to eat out, for example, a lot, and he was an obsessive theatre goer.
Trieste, it was a vibrant artistic city at the time. The Italian futurists were particularly active in Trieste. They were part of the broader modernist movement in that they wanted to revitalize literature and art and culture and make it new. He was certainly interested also in the Cubists, in the Dadists, in all of these movements, and in this fracturing of the subject, as happens in Ulysses.
In his decade in Trieste, Joyce continually fails to get his books published.
It's a kind of a heartbreaking story, but unlike, I think, most writers who become sort of slightly destroyed by rejection, he seems to manifest a kind of superhuman self-confidence.
Suddenly then, in 1914, life takes a radical turn. Joyce sends Dubliners and a chapter of a portrait to the American poet Ezra Pound.
It is surprising that Mr. Joyce is Irish. One is so tired of the Irish or Celtic imagination flopping about. He accepts an international standard of prose writing and lives up to it.
Pound brings Joyce under his wing and arranges for a portrait to be published in serial form in The Egoist, an English magazine run by Harriet Shaw Weaver. Dubliners is also published in 1914 by London publisher Grant Richards. Both works are hailed a success, and Joyce begins to be recognised as a great writer. In August 1914, the First World War, the most violent war humanity had ever known, ignites across Europe. 1914 is also the year in which Joyce starts Ulysses, and again, his focus is on Dublin.
For myself, I always write about Dublin, because if I can get to the heart of Dublin, I can get to the heart of all the cities in the world. In the particular is contained the universal.
We had this idea that if he could capture the lives of ordinary Dublin people on one day, that people anywhere in the world at any time would be able to read something of themselves in that.
The River Liffey, Davy Burns, the Monto, St Andrew's Church, Holles Street Hospital, Glasnevin Cemetery. In Ulysses, Dublin and its characters are brought vividly to life.
They went up the steps and under Merchant's Arch. A dark-backed figure scanned books on a hawker's cart.
Joyce draws on memory and maps to time and trace his characters' journeys through the city.
He spends a lot of time writing to his brother and others, asking them to go and check out shop fronts and what was where when.
Each shop is in the place it should be, each restaurant, each bar that the characters go into. The barman will be as close to the barman as possible. The man working in Sweeney's pharmacy.
Actually, it's quite crazy in many ways. Desire to get everything just right. And in a strange way, that's where his imagination most significantly triumphs, getting the lemon soap right.
Mr. Bloom raised a cake to his nostril, sweet, lemony wax.
Or getting the kidney in the butcher's window right.
He breathed in tranquilly the lukewarm breath of cooked, spicy pig's blood. A kidney oozed blood guts on the willowed patterned dish.
That's one of his extraordinary gifts.
It's sort of fascinating because it is his love letter to Dublin.
In no sense did he really ever leave. Having left the country in a strange way, his own soul actually did hover pretty close.
In May 1915, Italy declares war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, prompting Nora, Joyce and the children to leave for Zurich. Irish writer William Butler Yeats and Ezra Pound arrange funds to be sent to maintain the family, and later, donations that are initially anonymous begin to arrive from Harriet Shaw Weaver. These donations allow Joyce full freedom to write, and he throws himself into Ulysses with unprecedented energy. When the war ends, the Joyces move to Paris. The family settles into the 6th arrondissement, where Joyce is surrounded by a wealth of bookshops and intellectual stimulation.
He very quickly became part of a circle of literary people and very avant-garde people.
But despite his growing reputation, publishers remain wary of Joyce and are unwilling to consider publishing his new book, Ulysses. Part of the problem is that when the Little Review, an American literary magazine, had published some early episodes, it prompted a court case, the burning of the magazine, and the banning of Ulysses. But in Paris, Joyce meets an extraordinary woman who offers to take on the challenge of publishing Ulysses.
This very brave woman, Sylvia Beach, who was running Shakespeare and Company, who had never published a book before, decided she would take it upon herself to publish this enormous text. It was a very difficult process and nearly bankrupted her, but she stood by him.
He was so simple and unassuming. Ever conscious though I was of his genius, I knew no one so easy to talk with.
Sylvia Beach, following Joyce's meticulous instructions, arranges for the book to be printed by Maurice Darentière in Dijon and bound in Greek colours, white letters on blue. Ever sensitive to anniversaries and coincidences, Joyce had insisted Ulysses be published on his 40th birthday. On the morning of February 2nd, 1922, Sylvia Beach delivers the first copy to Joyce's apartment. The second she places in the window of Shakespeare & Co., where it generates great excitement. 18 years after leaving Ireland, Joyce has realised his audacious ambition, a book that will propel him into the pantheon of great writers.
When you step into Ulysses, you enter a universe of his creation, and it is an entire universe.
Meditations of the infinite litigious scintillating uncondensed Milky Way of so-called fixed stars, in reality ever-moving wanderers from immeasurably remote eons to infinitely remote futures.
He himself becomes a kind of god in the sense that he is the creator that Molly Bloom claims. If they don't believe in God, let them create something.
Everything is in there, including the kitchen sink. That's what we love about him. His capacity to, go from the wide shot Panavision to the big close-up.
Microbes, germs, bacteria, bacilli, spermatozoa, of the incalculable trillions of billions of millions of imperceptible molecules contained by cohesion of molecular affinity in a single pinhead.
This allows him then to kind of leap off into all of time and space and inside the human soul.
He is the inventor, let's say, of the famous stream of consciousness technique, which is the way he tries to represent the human mind.
Trams in, out. Those two loonies mooching about. Dignam carted off, minor. Pure voice. Swollen belly in a bed, groaning to have a child tugged out of her. One born every second. Some or other dying every second. Since I fed the birds 5 minutes.
It exploded the notion of the linear narrative, of the importance of the grammatical sentence, of plot, exposition, and character. It suddenly destroyed all those notions of what a great novel was supposed to be.
There's nothing like it. Never mind in Irish literature, there's nothing like it in world literature.
It's a pain in the arse as well, but inside it, there is real joy.
Joyce's Ulysses is immediately recognised as a modernist masterpiece.
Ulysses is the most important contribution that has been made to fictional literature in the 20th century.
But the book is banned in America and in England, where the popular press titillates readers with scathing reviews.
Ulysses appears to have been written by a perverted lunatic who has made a speciality of the literature of the latrine.
Crucially, in Europe, Joyce is celebrated as a great modernist thinker for the new century.
Pound, in particular, set the tone for commentary on Ulysses, which was to say, this is a work of internationalist, modernist fiction. It happens to be set in Dublin, but it is a book about the modern condition and could take place in any European or American city.
This emphatic embrace by modernists, however, has a detrimental impact on how Joyce will be perceived in Ireland. If Joyce is a European modernist writer, say the scholars and critics, then he cannot be an Irish writer. That Ulysses is at times critical of both Irish nationalists and the Irish Catholic Church does not assist the reception of his work in Ireland.
It was seen as a reckless, dangerous book to read. The moral values of it would not have been in sync with the moral values that dominated.
Ireland at that time, of course, in order for the new government to assert control, this kind of heavy blanket of conservatism was kind of set down on the people, and the church is allowed to assert itself, and Joyce falls foul of all of those things because of his unwillingness to fall into line.
But despite widespread censorship, Ulysses is not banned by the Irish Free State.
They didn't feel any need to ban Ulysses because nobody was going to buy it anyway. The masses are never going to read a book like Ulysses.
In Ireland, some note that Joyce seems to have ignored both the Dublin Rebellion of 1916 and the War of Independence, which brought about the end of British rule and the foundation of the Irish Free State. As Ireland came through her seismic revolution, Joyce, both personally and as a writer, appears to have stood utterly aloof from it all. In time, however, a dramatically different impression will emerge, in which Ulysses comes to be seen as the prophetic text of modern Ireland and Europe.
It's 100 years later, and it may be that it has taken us 100 years to learn to read that book.
To mark the publication of Ulysses 100 years ago, Sylvia Beach invited a famous French writer, Valérie Larbaud, to deliver a speech. Joyce coached Larbaud on what to say, which is intriguing because in his speech, Larbaud explicitly connects Ulysses with Irish independence.
In writing Dubliners' Portrait of the Artist and Ulysses, Joyce did as much as all of the heroes of Irish nationalism to attract the respect of intellectuals of every other country toward Ireland.
Here, suddenly, Joyce publishes a modernistic novel that comes completely left field. And it's an important signal to the world that this independent Ireland is not going to be quite as they might have anticipated, and Ulysses becomes a gesture towards a modern European Irish statehood.
Joyce then may have been an Irish nationalist to his core, but his form of nationalism, as expressed in Ulysses, is unique.
We often think of Joyce as a writer who has gone beyond, in a strange way, his certain aspects of his Irishness, whereas in fact, he is Irish through and through.
Cuchulainn, Khan of 100 battles, Niall of 9 hostages, Brian of Kincora, the Ordree Malachy, Art MacMurrough, Shane O'Neill, Father John Murphy, Owen Rowe.
None of Joyce's work makes any sense if you don't understand that at the centre of it is his preoccupation with the society and the culture and the politics that produced him.
In Paris in 1924, Joyce recorded a revealing passage from Ulysses, which he had based on an actual speech delivered by the Irish barrister John F. Taylor. The speech condemns the conquest and enslavement of the Jews by the Egyptians.
I heard the voice of that Egyptian high priest. You are a tribe of nomad herdsmen. We are a mighty people. But had the youthful Moses listened to that view of life, had he bowed his head, he would never have led the chosen people out of bondage.
Here Joyce connects the Egyptian conquest of the Jewish people 3,000 years ago with the British conquest of Ireland. Now Joyce thinks the Irish need their Moses.
Parnell, who was seen as the Irish Moses, is present at various points in Ulysses. He's a sort of a ghost.
Why should Ireland be treated as a geographical fragment of England? Ireland is not a geographical fragment, but a nation.
Charles Stewart Parnell was the political giant of the 1880s. A constitutional nationalist, he campaigned with unrivalled efficacy across Ireland and in the British Parliament for the establishment of an Irish Parliament from which the Irish could govern themselves. As leader of the Irish Party, Parnell nearly achieved Home Rule for Ireland by peaceful means. Parnell seemed unassailable, but his long-standing affair with Catherine O'Shea, wife of a former member of the Irish Party, made him vulnerable. An alliance of British politicians, his own comrades, and the Catholic Church conspired to bring him down.
Gladstone's Liberal Party condemned Parnell. The Catholic Church rode in. A majority of the Irish Party turned against Parnell.
The scandal destroyed Parnell, and he died soon after, on the 6th of October 1891, at the age of 45.
His death is completely traumatic for the Irish politic. I don't know what kind of analogy you can draw. The death of JFK, but it's probably bigger for Ireland.
Joyce saw the overthrow of Parnell as a historic mistake.
They did not throw him to the English wolves. They tore him apart themselves.
In felling Parnell, Joyce thought the Irish had lost their Moses. They would now be not only enslaved to Britain, but also enslaved to the Catholic Church.
I am the servant of two masters, Stephen said. The Imperial British State and the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church.
With Parnell lost, Joyce feared that the form of nationalism that would now emerge would be more extreme and would destroy Ireland's path to becoming a modern pluralistic democracy. The Irish Catholic Church was strengthened by the Parnell split. Irish politicians became reluctant to defy its power, and Joyce could see how, after the revolution, the Church would emerge as the dominant force. The new Irish Free State would see spiritual, cultural, and ethnic purity as one. Bloom's European Jewishness is Joyce's direct response to Ireland's search for purity.
Bloom's background is Hungarian, and the family travelled across Europe. We hear about the connections in Hungary, in Vienna, in Milan, all the way to Dublin.
In the Cyclops episode, when the old nationalist, the Citizen, confronts Bloom about whether he is Irish, Bloom faces him down.
Now, what is your nation, if I may ask, says the Citizen. Ireland, says Bloom. I was born here in Ireland.
The scene turns violent as the Citizen lunges at Bloom and chases him out of Barney Kiernan's.
By Jesus, says he, I'll brain that bloody Jew man for using the holy name. By Jesus, I'll crucify him, so I will.
Just putting together Jesus and crucifixion, of course, makes it absurd and reveals why anti-Semitism, it doesn't make sense.
If Joyce was intolerant of anything in Irish nationalism, it was the idea of racial purity, that you could have some kind of population that was ethnically pure.
Joyce is reaching out towards those that are seen as outside society and who are being victims of racism and bullying and various things, just as Bloom is in Ulysses.
Late in the evening, as Ulysses nears its end, Bloom invites Stephen to his house. At one point, Bloom sings a song in Hebrew. Stephen responds with an Irish song, Shularoon, a song Joyce uses as a warning about nationalism.
Shularoon is a woman lamenting her lover going off to war. So it can certainly be taken as a song that warns of the dangers of war. Earlier in the Sirens episode, it's made really explicit that music can be very dangerous in that it can lead people to war, or it can lead people to let go of their senses. Nationalism is being depicted as something that you sleepwalk into, that you close your eyes and you walk into the danger.
Extremism, xenophobia, chauvinism, the oppression of other nations and races was profoundly objectionable to Joyce.
Joyce saw very early the dangers of discrimination and the dangers of extreme nationalism. After Ulysses, in the late 20s and into the 30s, he sees the rise of fascism and then Nazism. He also knew people in Trieste who were victims of all of that, Jewish people. So he lived it in a very real way, and I think it terrified him. The politics of Europe at the time were nationalistic. It was one voice for everybody. Finnegan's Wake is the response to all of that, where there is no one voice, there is no one way of understanding everything.
Once Ulysses had been published, Joyce set to writing Finnegan's Wake. His final work, it is one of the most challenging books ever written.
Finnegan's Wake, he creates an international mixed mishmash of languages, and he writes an entire book, which is, very inaccessible because of that. But from even political point of view, that is a very strong answer.
Well, don't you, Kenneth, or haven't I told you, every telling has a tailing, and that's the he and the she of it.
Divisions and boundaries are to be as meaningless as possible.
It's testament to the fact that we're all mixed up, that we're all one race, the human race, if you like.
James Joyce and his family left France for Zurich in December 1940. And it was there that he died, aged 59, on January 13th, 1941, after undergoing surgery for a perforated ulcer.
The Irish government refused to send a representative to his funeral in Zurich, leaving the coast clear for the British to send Lord Derwent, who of course famously spoke at his grave and spoke very well.
George Moore is gone, Yeats is gone, and now Joyce. But of one thing I am sure. Whatever be the rights and wrongs of the relations between England and Ireland, I know Ireland will continue to take the finest and most ironical of revenges on us. She will go on giving us great men of letters.
It will take many decades before Ireland matures sufficiently to embrace her son.
The reaction against Joyce is a recoil bred of exactly the insularity that he was challenging. It's almost like an issue in physics, an equal and opposite reaction. Joyce remained disengaged from the Ireland of the Free State, and the Ireland of the Free State remained distant from Joyce.
In 1962, a small group of Joyce enthusiasts buys the Martello Tower in Sandy Cove and opens a museum in his honour. But it will not be until the centenary of his birth in 1982 that a true change occurs.
Irish critics begin to say, well, Joyce is an extremely Irish writer, though the Irishness of his output has been underestimated. We have turned him into this wordsmith, divorced from Ireland, who doesn't care about Irish politics or the Irish state. And we need to begin to address that.
And eventually Joyce attains the cult status that he has in modern Ireland. He and Ulysses become virtually symbols of the Irish state.
"100 years on, Ulysses is revered as both a European and an Irish modernist masterpiece.
I think Joyce is very definitely writing a book about how we live in society and how society has to be open to people who are different.
Bloom makes this statement about the importance of love. Love being, he says, the opposite of hatred. Joyce saw it as essential to be true. And in fact, so many of the things that finally were given voice to in recent decades about clerical abuse or the lives of women working in laundries, domestic abuse going on in the house and so on, all of those things are there in Joyce already.
Joyce proved an accurate prophet in relation to a more open Ireland, a more pluralistic Ireland, and a more European Ireland.
I think that Joyce would be thrilled to think of the modern Ireland. The change that has taken place is absolutely remarkable. I think he would have been thrilled by that.
In Joyce's epic, the final word is with Molly.
And his heart was going like mad. And yes, I said, yes, I will. Yes.
In Ulysses, Molly's yes becomes a statement of affirmation, reconciliation, and acceptance.
On one very basic level, it's a book about respect. Leopold Bloom somehow respects what Molly Bloom does and allows her space. It's not a perfect marriage, but it's an arrangement that, for the moment at least, works for them.
It is a deliberate statement of Joyce's belief in a plurality of ways of being in the world. That there is no one way to live one's life.
He is quite joyous. I think he does kind of love humanity. He loves sex. He loves the world. He's quite open to everything.
Yes, at the end, is about an embrace of the impossibility of going forward and yet the inevitability of going forward. He has made you, as a reader, toil through this huge, long, difficult, complicated book, and you arrive at the end, and it's like you've come down the Amazon and you're about to open out into the ocean, and that's the end. He shows you the sea, and then off you go.
The book must end with yes. It must end with the most positive word in the human language. yes.